Hi, Rob.
Hi, Ivan. How are you?
Yeah, good. I will grab some water, and we still need to wait for Yaku anyway. It will take like a couple minutes.
Okay.
It's still like two of us. I will quickly ping Yakov, and we will start with the official part, and maybe Yakov will join. Yeah, so let's start. Yeah, going for agenda. If you're watching the recording and want to join this meeting to discuss like GraphQL.js topic, you need to sign specification membership agreement, participation guideline, and code of conduct. All the links are in agenda. Yeah, like introduction of attendees, it's only two of us. It's weird, but it's still on agenda. So hi, my name is Ivan.
Hi, Rob. Working on different stream.
Yeah, we have one agenda item unless Robbie want to add something else. By the way, do you want to discuss something else, or it's like about execute and experimental execute? You trying to discuss that?
Yeah, I wanted to discuss with Yakov's item about incremental delivery.
Yeah, please make an action item. Yeah, we're behind on action item. At some point, yeah, I think like some of them like resolve itself. Like we did release, we merge stream and defer. I release alpha 2. By the way, I'm not sure. Yeah, I didn't ping you, but maybe you saw I release alpha 2, which includes stream defer. There is like still problem with ESM. Unexpectedly, I thought like I will merge with PR from the guild and it will work, but yeah, there is like some things about ESM I need to fix. So
I guess, does this mean that GraphQL.js can't be used from CommonJS anymore?
no, opposite. So previously, and by the way, we have time to discuss stuff since we're still waiting for Yaku. So long story short, previously we had like CJS, GraphQL.js was CJS package, but it had some MJS files, but it didn't work with Node properly. So like I wanted to try to go like radical and nobody opposed it. So I just switched to MJS. We discussed it like half a year ago and I switched to MJS fully. But since there is like feedback from the guild, Warren, I think open an issue. And I also get a feedback from David saying the same. It's like ecosystem is not ready. So idea I found, like with old PR, we discussed like with alternative solution, because it's easy, simplest alternative solution I could find. Basically to release like two packages, one CJS and one MJS. I merged, and it's kind of work, but like I learned like MJS part need to be, so like Alpha 2 contain, it's like fully CJS package. It's very similar to version 16. So content is the same. It's basically version 16 with everything on the master, on the main. And ESM version should have the same code, but as ESM. One issue is like related to how semantic version is working. In the original proposal, it was adding the dash ESM to version, and it doesn't work because it thinks like in NPM thinks it's pre-release. I tried to be clever and use plus sign, because same version allows you plus sign, until I like had an issue that NPM prevents you from publishing multiple versions of the same package, and it's treated like a plus, things after a plus sign as non-unique thing. So basically, if you do 1700 plus ESM and 1700 without ESM, you can publish only one of them. But I figured out a solution. Basically, like there is NPM support aliases. I need to write instruction how to use that. And idea is to basically release package ESM package under different name. So like and people can use alias. Everything will work. I check like the dependency is working. Everything is like should work. And basically, it's like return back with idea that CJS is the main line, but if people want to experiment, they can use MJS, and next release we can switch it other way around, have like MJS as a primary and CJS as a secondary. We will see if it, I think it will work. If not, we can choose more radical solution like instance of, and like going through a route of figuring out like how to use packages from different instances of the same package, of GraphQL package, which is more complicated. Did I answer your question, or did you want to?
Yeah, definitely. Because I know a lot of packages are going to only ESM, and my code base is definitely not ready for that. And I wouldn't want that to be like a blocker for people starting to use defer and stream.
Yeah, I have a cat. We got a cat, and she don't like close the doors. So I like, yeah. Sorry for interruption. So, hi, Yakov. And I cannot read like Hebrew, so I cannot read the things that I send you to say it in person, but happy Jewish New Year or something. Have a great New Year.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. Happy Jewish New Year.
Yeah, so we discuss basically, and sorry for interruption. I have a cat, so yeah, and she like, I'm only one at home right now, so she tried to yeah, destroy things. Yeah, so return back to agenda. By the way, we discussed like CJS and ESM thing. I will publish update on that, because I merged that pair and it didn't work as expected. it didn't work as expected. So it needs some refinement, and I think we have a separate issue for that. So I will write there, so everybody in sync on what's happening. So I publish Alpha 2, and it's basically CJS only right now, because I cannot publish second package. Yeah, Cat is very active. So we can start with agenda item with incremental delivery, and it's your topic, Yakov. So, mic to you.
Yeah. So basically, there are a few PRs up. I guess I'll summarize briefly just to make sure that I'm in the right frame of mind. I think what the current state is, and then I'll just discuss the different PRs in terms of which way we might want to go in terms of that. So basically, we have, thanks to, we all know that we have the incremental delivery has now merged into main, which is really, really exciting, really great. And right now we have two functions. One is the execute, and one is called experimental execute. And from what I understand, and feel free to anyone to jump in if I have this wrong, but from what I understand, the experimental execute is the only way that you'll get currently incremental delivery enabled. And if you try to use incremental delivery directives, i.e. the defer and stream directives using execute, that will currently throw, but it only throws when if those incremental delivery directives are evaluate to true, and an incremental payload would be returned. And so there are a couple questions that I have about this in terms of making sure that our experimental flag, generally speaking, for incremental delivery for any increment for any experimental capability is really the way we want it, and also specifically with regards to defer and stream. So in general, we have experimental features. We want to allow them through the use of experimental flags like that, where you can opt in to getting these experimental features. But it gets a little tricky with defer and stream for two reasons, from what I understand it. The first reason is that the return type of our functions actually changes based on these incremental delivery. And so from like a typing perspective, from a TypeScript perspective, even if you don't enable the functionality, you're potentially exposed to a new return type, were that functionality to be enabled. And so that's what we're basically guarding against by having these two different functions, execute and experimental execute. We sort of make sure that that's not the case, that if you're using execute, you are guaranteed to have the original return type of just an execution promise for an actual execution result. And the other thing that's a little tricky with regards to the incremental delivery directives is that there's another possibility, is that to utilize the directives themselves as the flags. And we were trying to base as much as possible in terms of whether incremental delivery is enabled on whether the directives are actually in the schema, and having that just be the only flag to determine whether you have incremental delivery is enabled or not enabled. And now that we have this experimental function, we sort of have two different things driving. And so that leads us into edge cases. What happens if someone uses the old execute function when the directives are in the schema, or what if they use the new function when the directives are not in the schema, and cases like that. And so there are a couple PRs up. My preference is to make things stick to that vision as much as possible, meaning the vision of having just whether the directives are in the schema, are driving whether you you really get the new functionality. But it's a little bit tricky. And so the PR that I actually favor, I guess, is amongst the group is basically the last one. That's 3732, and that basically we basically don't at runtime we enable a defer and stream basically if the directives are used, meaning the directives themselves are the flag. And those directives don't really even need to be validated against within the execute function because they're assumed to be valid. Meaning, if they're present in the schema, we assume that when we pass everything to execute, we assume that everything has been the query, the operation has been validated. And so that means that if the directives are being used, then we assume that they are in the schema. And so therefore, we basically assume, following through, we assume that if they're being used, then defer and stream have been enabled. And then the only problem that we run into is making sure that there's still an avenue for people to have the old return types versus the new return types. And we can do that not at runtime. We can do that just using TypeScript conditional types. And so that was my suggestion as to one way to to thread this these different concerns. I think another possible way is, I have a couple different PRs up there. I think another possible way would be to say that we could have two different functions, and it could throw based on the presence of the directives in the schema or not in the schema, whether you're using the right function. But I basically think that there's a lot of different options that make sense, and those are in the PRs that I've set up. But I don't think the way we have it currently is so great, because the way we have it currently is that it only is going to give you a warning if an incremental delivery payload is returned. It happens to be returned. But other than that, everything's going to look great, even though you're using like the old execute function. And then only if like defer with an argument of if evaluates to true, then you might get a problem. And that doesn't seem to be right. Meaning it seems to be that if someone's using defer and stream, they get an operation like that, it shouldn't depend on the response. It should throw like immediately before execution starts. So anyway, that's a little bit of background. Probably I spoke a little bit too long about it, but there's not too much else on the agenda. And just throwing it out there for synchronous or asynchronous feedback.
What's your opinion, Rob? Since you're a champion of this feature, what do you think is the right call?
So I haven't actually seen the last one where you used a type argument. That's interesting. I don't have like a super strong opinion. Like I'm fine with I think most of these options. I do want to call out that I had already proposed about removing subscription support. And in that case, I definitely want the behavior where if you have a defer that's disabled with false, the subscription should not be an error. So it's going to be a field error only if the defer is enabled. I think that's a different scenario though, because it's actually not going to be, the proposal is not to have subscription in the spec, where this is just for what we have here, I guess, before defer is finalized. Yeah, I guess the question is like what do we think is like the long-term direction after defer is part of the spec? What do we expect GraphQL.js to do? So is this only like an interim solution, or is this?
Yeah, I'm basically think like we still have open questions. Not only subscription, like for example, I want has next. I want like pivot always have to have has next, and if we make it optional, like people use important thing to know about execution result. If I remember correctly, like people actually use it on the client. We have like multiple issues where people use it on the client or as like in middlewares. So it's not only type use as like output, but for some functions, for some client functions, it's used as input, which basically make like if has next previously was optional and became non-optional, it's breaking change. That's why I'm like, until we have like these questions, I'm not super on like making it non-experimental. Also, it's one point. Second point, I think we need to have a strong opinion on the things. If we add stream and defer, we need to not force, but rely. Like if we add it in a spec in first place, we want all the server to support it. Like all the protocols that can technically serve it to support it. And I don't see any like problem with supporting it anywhere. So I think we need to design in long run, we need to design API that makes sense for that treat like stream and defer as first class citizen. So I'm against union of like execution result or like some structure with initial result and subsequent result. I'm just for returning initial result and optional subsequent results, subsequent payloads. We discussed it with David. Sorry for changing like last minute, but David wanted to use it in Apollo server, and we brainstorm it and figure out this structure, like initial response and subsequent payload. And I think it's like a way forward because it's like eliminate this union of types. So I'm like for having maybe promise or promise or value, I forget how our type is called, of object with initial response and subsequent payload, which is breaking change. And I'm for figuring out how to do this breaking change. So I'm like, my restriction is like that we should not mix like experimental types and function with non-experimental, because it's like it's remove a border between what potentially we can break stuff by changing experimental things. And second point is like long-term solution for me is like having simpler return type and having a return type optimized for like full use case for stream and defer. If you don't want to use stream and defer, for you it's a question of adding dot initial result in your source code, which is not that big a deal and easier than to have like union and try to figure out what type from a union you actually got. So yeah, it's my restriction. But I agree with Jakub that current way forward is not ideal. It's confusing. It's kind of initially I spoke with David, and David actually made this change for reference. I don't know if you remember or not. So an idea was to do the same as execute sync, kind of, but I agree it's different. execute sync is not based on directives. Here it's like you have two switches. I'm like, I don't know what proposal it is, but I'm for keeping two functions and have like initial check. And if you use experimental function on a schema without streaming defer, everything works. If you use experimental function on schema with stream defer, everything also works. But if you use normal function on a schema with stream and defer, stuff doesn't work. That open one potential problem. You get like error, as Yakov said, potential problem. What if we have single schema served by different protocols and protocol support or not? But since entire ecosystem treats stream defer as feature flag, we discussed multiple times on the working group, and if protocol doesn't support stream and defer, server should clone a schema, remove stream and defer, and expose it. Because like it makes sense for a client. If client connects through that protocol and we agree that stream and defer is feature flag, it shouldn't be a situation where you see stream and defer and you cannot send stream and defer. This is what basically we have right now. So if client, and like if we look at user story, so we publish a new version and it's have like a stream and defer and release notes, and person just put like add stream and defer in his schema, and suddenly, and he expects stream and defer work on the client, a validation pass, but when he have like strange error saying stream and defer is not supported, and he's like surprised. Ideally, it should happen. Yeah, so I agree with Yakov, and I'm like for keeping that idea in mind. So if we publish something is experimental, and I'm for still keeping it experimental, by the way, like it's draft 2, but I'm for keeping it for make an official release with it, but keeping it experimental, people giving feedback, and if everything good, we just like alias stuff or like figuring out how to do that. Maybe like even do a new version specifically for that switch. But I'm for publishing it, allowing people to experiment with it, and in non-confusing way. So I'm like for option of using stream defer directive as feature flag, but having two functions and having a bunch of time to figure out return types and getting feedback on it. Because like, for example, previous version with async iteratable, with promise execution result, promise of execution result, or async iteratable of execution result. It looked good on the paper. Like I was agree, have nothing, no problem with it, until like David start integrating it up our server and discover like initial result need the special treatment. So we need to know if like it's one result or multiple result, and it's weird to do that with async iteratable. So I'm like for keeping it a separate function and like allow us to iterate on types, on stream and defer in general.
I agree. And like to clarify what I meant before, I definitely, I think I want to get defer and stream in the spec, and I want as many servers as possible to support it. And I think that we definitely should iterate and have, when it is in the spec, have like a good API for how to opt in, and probably the way to opt out is, like you said, not having the directives in the schema. Until then, that what I meant was that until we get to that point, I don't exactly how we expose the experimental behavior behind a flag or a separate function or something else. That's what I don't think was as important as what the like end result is of once it is in the spec and what the final API is. And so I think what you said of in the original function, checking the schema for defer and stream and throwing if they're present, that makes sense to me. That is what you said, right?
Yeah. I'm actually having one argument that if we all agree, it's provide us roadmap. So I think like a way forward is to have like in your last PR that you sent, Yakov, is 3278, and I'm looking at sorry, I like lost navigation for some reason. No, it's like different one. Sorry, it's one that I merged. Yeah, so and I'm looking at right now.
The last one is 3. I mean, basically, I mean, I agree with both of you, and I guess I'm just about the long term. And I guess I also don't have too much preference as whether we use an experimental function. The other option, though, is an experimental option. And the other option is, which was the last one that I was kind of favoring, but again, not very strongly, but was basically not to do any runtime checks and just to allow TypeScript to infer, you know, basically like to have an experimental option just for TypeScript. So those are the 3 options, meaning we could have a runtime check, and that could be guarded by a separate function or a separate option. The one thing that I don't think is the way we have it now, but it's just a small change, and we have a lot of options here.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly ask if we're on the same page. I have like some technical problem. So if I remember correctly, like your PR with TypeScript things, you were switching between execution result or experimental like union type. So are we all agree that in long term we want only like second part, we want only like object with initial result and subsequent payload, right? If so, it's a breaking change. There is no like way around it. We can figure out how to make it less breaking. But in long term, it's improve like the X, because union types, especially between objects, is ugly in TypeScript. It's like hard to detect which type you get, and like it's bad developer experience. So if we all agree that we want to migrate to this object type with initial result and subsequent payload, I think it's a bad thing to have like intermediate types, because it makes migration harder. It's not like you're migrating from one type to another type. One type. I'm for keeping it simple and trying to switch from wet to wet and keep like it simple. And your solution with 2 functions but initial check, keep it like that. So it's keep it like readable, it's easy to understand, and migration is less confusing. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. I think so. That's one of the earlier PRs. Basically, I think we're on the same page. So I'll just, after this meeting, I'll close all the other PRs and I'll put one that I think we're with the two functions, and we'll check. If I remember right, we're saying that if you're using the old execute function, but a schema has defer and stream, then you should defer or stream. Then I guess you should get an error, but not the other way around. You should be able to use the new function with a schema without. And I'll close all the other ones. We'll have this one. I think even one of them is pretty close to that already. So we're good. We're good.
Yeah, one thing to have it test that it's like from David, because in Apollo we want to support defer without a stream, at least initially. So to also work in bad condition, like so a function support just defer or just stream, or like defer and stream, or stuff without defer and stream. Experimental function. But if you in normal execute function, if you pass stream, it's error. If you pass schema with defer, it's error. If you pass schema with stream and defer, it's also error. So
no, but you even if you wanted to support only defer, only stream, you could still do so, I think, with the new function, with just one new function, right?
Yeah, one new function.
One new function.
I'm just saying, like in test cases, please like create test cases.
Test cases.
Separate stream and separate defer, because it's a use case for us. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, what we have from what we have now, the change is really just changing the validation from being like after everything's done, checking if anything happened, versus checking the schema before we start execution.
I think, that's what I think.
And then the idea is from there, we have this experimental execute function, and we should keep iterating on the types until we think that that's something that could ultimately replace the original execute.
Especially like, for example, I want has next in every
Sure.
Not only first, not only like subsequent. Yakov suggests like dropping has next at all. So we in the stage of like figuring out response. I'm like, and by the way, how about it took like a long time for version 17, and a lot of change happened. So I'm like, I reviewed stuff we have right now in pipeline, and there is like two major things, like ESM support and enums. And previously we discussed a bunch of what is the release like goal of version 17. And we said that was stream and defer support, and we will wait for stream and defer, and it will be like main feature. What I suggest to do is I'm like figuring out MJS part, and also I rebased like Brian PR about enums. We will figure out these two main things, ESM and enums, and have like your change to Yakov change that you propose to execute function, and we release like a release candidate, like beta or probably beta. Ask people to test it, release candidate, release it, because like if we in alpha stage, not a lot of people will actually try stream and defer, and so we release it version 17 with experimental execute function. Allow people to try use it in production, kind of production, but they know it's experimental because it's like function say it's experimental, and have version and switch main to version 18 and work on like having one function, how to do migration, how to do with breaking change with the type, but having progress for half a year of progress released, and having like stream and defer in the hands of people to try as experimental feature, but on stable release. What
Yeah,
do
that
you
would be great.
think about that plan? Okay, I will. I will open an issue and like point there like about MJS, about enums, and your PR about like release checklist, and see like maybe people think something else is super critical before release, and we can start like going through release process.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Anything else we want to discuss? We still have like 18 minutes. No. Yeah. If that's the case, I think like it was productive. We figure out what to do, and happy Jewish New Year, and happy like happy rest of the day.
Happy Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to
Be well.
add defer and stream to the next working group meeting. I think that's next week.
Yeah.
I guess.
And by the way, what do you think is best approach? Like, because me and Yakov suggested a few topics, a few like discussion points. Do we need to add them separately, or you will do like a batch discussion as you did previously?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me know what topics you want to discuss, and I could add them all to the agenda.
I think like all the open topics make sense, and plus it's like extremely for hot topic, important topic. So like I don't think anybody will argue against like having like half an hour of stream and defer, but progress it faster. But please like allocate like if it's at least like 5-10 minutes per topic, just in case we will have. I think there is like some other topics also from other people. You did a good job previously on like going through them. So if you do it that time, we can have a lot of progress in single meeting.
Okay, yeah, I'll add that to the agenda.
Okay. Sounds good. And see you like on the working group next week. Yeah. Happy rest of the day. Bye.